Today is Friday, March the 7th in 2025, and we welcome you to our Chapter 49 podcast. Chapter 49 represents most IRS employees in the state of Indiana. My name is Larry Lannan. I am a communications volunteer here at Chapter 49. And once again, we welcome our chapter president, Duncan Giles.
Thanks, Larry. It's always good to be here.
So we welcome you back. We know that there's been a lot going on. I don't know how to describe this. It's not like there's something new every week or every day. There's something new every hour and every minute. So what we will do once again, we are recording this at roughly 12:30 p.m. on March 7th. It's 2025. That is Eastern time, in case you are watching it listening in another time zone. So we know there's a lot going on, and even when we did last week's podcast, there were changes later that day and days after that. So all we can do is give you what we know now. We continue to update our Facebook page. If you want to follow the last minute news that way, just go to Facebook and search under NTEU Chapter 49 Indiana. We've had a lot more people sign up for that. We do our best to keep that up to date. So, Duncan, I think we want to start off with the anxiety that's going on in the workplace at IRS. And I think the root of all this is the decision by people at the highest levels of our federal government to ignore all of the contracts that have been negotiated with the unions. Just about an hour or so before we recorded this, I received an update that the TSA, the people who do security at the airports, who check you out when you go in, there's been a decision by the government, Homeland Security, to ignore their contracts with another union. Now, of course, as you know, NTEU is working hard to reverse a decision by the IRS and people above IRS and Treasury to ignore our contract and bring everybody into the office and just cancel most all telework with only a few little exceptions here and there. We know there's a lot of anxiety about this, and we know there's going to be an awful lot of confusion and mayhem as this goes into play. And as that's going on, we do tell you to obey the orders you're given, but we also at the same time want you to know that NTE, we're in all of the legal remedies that are available to us. We do understand what you're all going through and how you feel about this, and we're doing our best to respond. So, Duncan, I guess we'll open the podcast to kind of talk about this movement at the top levels of government, at the administration, to just ignore union contracts and do whatever they want, whether it's returning to the office at IRS or ignoring the contract at the TSA with another union. We're seeing a pattern here. So talk about, how people should react to this and remind people what NTU as a union is doing about this. And we're doing it as quickly as we can.
Yeah, this is something that is happening across all governmental agencies, including many that NTU represents and many that NTU doesn't, that are represented by other unions or don't have a union, that they are just basically ignoring the rule of law and our agreements that we have that have been negotiated, painstakingly so in some cases. I can tell you for our national agreement, that was a painstaking process. And just doing things the way they want, and that's not the way it's going to go. The problem is people want a quick fix. That's the issue. I've talked to countless people since the return to office edict has come up, and they're like, well, we need to do something right now. NTEU is doing everything that they can. Has National President Doreen Greenwald sent something out earlier this week describing what is going on, that we have filed a national grievance. If that gets denied, we'll be following our legal remedies, whether it be Merit System Protection Board or into the courts eventually, if we need to. So I have every reason to believe that we will prevail in this because, as I said, this is the rule of law. You have a valid agreement, whether it's with TSA, whether it's with IRS, whether, it's whatever agency, Customs and Border Protection. We are entitled to those rights because they have been negotiated. The problem is, like I alluded to earlier, that they can take a long time to get resolved if the government is determined to fight every step of the way. And right now, where it's coming into is the return to office edict. That is one of the issues that NTU is looking at and fighting. But we're going on a multitude of fronts. And let me tell you, folks, NTU is doing everything they can locally and nationally to protect your rights. You don't see a lot of it is behind the scenes because it's legal things that we have to do, steps that we have to take. And again, it can be painstaking at times, but we are moving forward with the greatest speed that we can because, whether it's our national president, Doreen Greenwald, our national VP, Terry Scott, or any of my local brethren chapters across the country, including myself, we realize how big of a pain in the butt this is, how illogical it is, and want to make sure that we can get this rectified as soon as possible.
Right, Duncan. And I think that I can understand how people feel. I mean, obviously, you know, working at home, we started calling it flexi place before the technology got to the point where we could call it telework, where you're working at home tied into the office. And work at home has been around since the 1990s. So there are some people who've had this all or most of their working life at IRS. This is part of the way they do business. To come into the office every day, and just to remind people how silly this can be. If you're a revenue agent or a revenue officer working out in the field, and sometimes you could, if you're close to your home, you could go home and finish up your paperwork, get on your computer and finish up the work. Now, if you have time left in your day, you either have to take leave or you come all the way to the office and all the way back home. So it doesn't make logical sense to do some of these things that are being done. And I do want to talk a little bit, if I can, about what's happening with the offices themselves, because we are being told by the management that there will be a desk for everyone. Just how confident are you that the management, with the space that the IRS has at this time, just look at Indiana. We know this is a nationwide issue. Let's just talk about what we know best, what's happening in Indiana. Will there be a desk workplace for everyone? Goes into the office. I think this coming Monday. Am I right on this? When that's supposed to start. So, will there be a workplace, a desk, a place to work for everyone who's coming into work at that time on Monday?
Will there be a desk for everyone? Is the question. The answer is nope, there isn't in certain posted duties. Um, and part of the problem and part of the issue is when this came down, we have local folks in our facilities, our FMSS, who would be able to check a lot of these and be able to, sanity check, for lack of a better term. This is coming down nationally. This is not anything to do with local. All they're being told to do is implement what we're giving you, even if it makes absolutely no freaking sense, where it does in a lot of locations. And there are many locations where we're going to be very close to being able to fit everyone. There are other locations. I had a probably 20-minute conversation with our chapter treasurer, Zoe Olgi, who's up in Maryville, Indiana. And the PODs around the Chicago area are all stacked to the gills and have been 3-1, 4-1, even 5-1. And now they're saying, okay, we're going to pull everybody back to the office. And people who have been there 10, 15, 20 years are not given desk assignments. They're basically being told, we don't know where to put you. We're going to put you in a conference room and we're going to have you sit next to 4 or 5 other people because we don't have desks for them. Well, you've got so much problem, in that sort of situation where, if you're a revenue agent, especially, or a tax compliance officer, or TCO, and even revenue officers, you need to spread your stuff out. You need to spread out forms, take a look. There's still an awful lot of paper that goes on to be able to take a look at things. You're not going to be able to do that because you're going to be in pretty confined quarters. And that's another thing that IRS is has told NTU we're trying to do the best we can, but we're waiting. We're hamstrung because of the confines of GSA, and GSA is laying off half of their workforce. So there's less and less people to be able to work these issues, and finding space is not a quick fix. From start to finish, it can easily take a couple of years. So, in the meantime, what are people supposed to do? It's an insane situation that makes no sense. And then you add in for folks who normally go out in the field, your revenue officers, your revenue agents, they'll go out to the field. Well, they've been told don't travel. We don't want to spend the money. And their credit card limits have gone down to very little, so they can't do an overnight stay, even if their case is 100 miles away, which is not uncommon at all. There's so many things that are basically conflicting with everybody, and it all adds up to not being able to do the job that we need to do for the American taxpayer.
And I think the real interesting aspect of this, and you and I have talked about this on this podcast for a year. We've been doing this podcast since summer, spring of 2020. And you have been saying time and time again that the IRS has been moving toward sharing workstations, sharing desks. As you said, 3 to 1, 4 to 1. There are places where it was 5 to 1. And now we're supposed to take that huge tanker and turn it all the way around and move it another direction. This cannot be done easily. And that's part of the problem because we had been set up as an agency to share desks, people working in the field and in their homes. Now, all of a sudden, okay, if you're not in the field, we expect you in the office. That's just not an easy thing to do, especially if you look at where we've been the last few years.
This is basically the Titanic. Instead of trying to steer away from the iceberg, saying full speed ahead, let's aim right for it, because that's where we're heading. It's a just colossal disaster waiting to happen at several places across the country because there's not work space enough to call everyone back to the office, and we're doing this for something that isn't really happening. They basically say, well, we want to get collaboration back. We want to make sure that, everybody's together and they can collaborate and they can spend money at local businesses and things of that nature. Well, first off, on collaboration, you're not going to have that because many groups are spread out over several different posted duties. So it's not like you're going to have, everybody together in one place. And then I can't tell you the number of people I've talked to that said, I am not going to be spending any extra money. I've got to spend extra money on gas to get here and things of that nature. I won't be going out. I won't be going to restaurants. I will be doing as little as possible in my community because I need to save money. So it's again counterproductive for what they're looking for. And, and we've made, locally, nationally, to everyone. Our folks from NTU were just on the Hill this week. A lot of my brethren across the country and chapters were on Capitol Hill to talk to representatives, senators about this situation, telling them, this is one of the issues that we're having in the IRS, and it's not going to be good for your constituents because it's not good for anybody right now.
Well, they've been hearing from their constituents. What I've heard, these members of Congress and senators, in fact, some of them have canceled all of their town hall meetings, which I find interesting because the public's showing up and yelling at them. The ones that are seem that well, actually everyone, even the ones that are with us. I mean, they're saying, we want you to be even more aggressive in fighting these things. We have more to talk about with what's happening with agencies and IRS, but before we do that, let's talk about what's coming right at us within a few days. Because I believe it's March 14th at midnight. Is that correct?
Yep.
That's the deadline. That's when our current continuing resolution expires, which means government funding will end unless one of two things happens. We have a full budget passed. Good luck with that. Or we get another continuing resolution, maybe a shorter term one. Who knows? I mean, some people in Congress want to have a CR the rest of the year, which would be even worse budget wise than what we're seeing today. So there is a shutdown looming, and I've been not just reading the tea leaves, I've been reading what the journalists have been writing about this, who have great contacts on Capitol Hill and just what's being said publicly. And to be honest, Duncan, you and I have watched these for years. I am not optimistic that we will avoid a shutdown, but what are you saying?
Yeah, I'm seeing the same thing. The House has a very historically low majority, and some of them are not going to vote for anything unless there is deficits that are being reduced. They don't want to vote for a continuing resolution. Let's put it that way. They want to they want to have their own plans in place, and unfortunately, you're not going to be able to get that with that slim of a margin. And then it has to go over to the Senate. And then the president has to, it has to be something that he'd be willing to sign. So I think that there are a lot of issues right now. Supposedly, the House is going to be releasing a text, if not today, over the weekend, of what they're planning on trying to pass for a continuing resolution. And I am hearing like you said, that they want to pass it through the rest of the fiscal year. It blows my mind that we would have a continuing resolution for an entire year. The one thing that Congress is supposed to do, the one main task that they have, is to pass budget bills, and they're not going to do it. They're going to kick the can down literally for an entire year. And then we'll see what the 25 budget looks like, which could be extremely interesting. But I'm very concerned for employees who, if there's a budget shutdown, if there's a shutdown because of the budget, how long is it going to last? And who's going to be what's called an accepted employee and being told to come in? Those are big issues too, and I'm extremely concerned about that.
Well, we are watching this very closely. We hope there's no shutdown. And the fact is, Duncan, here we go again. People on Capitol Hill, our elected officials, have to find a way to negotiate, to meet each other halfway. I mean, if there's not enough votes for one party, you negotiate with the other party. Well, that broke down several days ago when there were talks like that. So we just don't seem to have an effort to compromise, which is how we became a nation. If people weren't willing to compromise, we never would have the United States of America. But I'm not going to get into all that. So we are very, very concerned about a potential shutdown. As Duncan said, we'll watch it carefully. I think we'll have at least one more uh, podcast before the shutdown deadline. We'll hopefully know more then. You never know. And if there is a shutdown, we'll try to keep the podcast going somehow. Duncan may be at his home, not as in, I'm at my home office. Duncan is in his office at the Capehart building, and we'll talk about the future of that building here in just a moment. But before we do that, let's talk once again about probationary employees. We talked about that the last couple of podcasts. And I think I would echo what you said the last time you and I got together on a podcast. All the probationary employees, many agencies are being let go with the idea that every single one of them is not performing, which we find rather odd because poor performers, if they're probationary, usually are let go pretty quickly. You and I have been through this before representing people who are probationary employees. I mean, they have fewer rights than those that are career conditional or career. But on the other hand, to say that everybody is not performing adequately is just impossible. It can't happen. Never has happened. But that seems to be what the argument is. So we've been in court. Other people have been in court. Other unions have been in court. Nonprofits that think like us are in court. I mean, the courts are going crazy with this whole probationary employee issue. Is there a way to give people an update as to where all this litigation stands?
Yeah, this is one of those things where the courts are starting to look at this and make the points that you exactly are. Now the federal government is starting to say for probationary employees that they're still letting go in certain agencies. That it's due to the best interest of the government for efficiency, which is another huge crock, to be honest. Um, but these court cases are starting to stack up where their agencies are being told to rehire these employees back. And that's, I think, is a wonderful thing. And if they get rehired back, if they choose to come back, um, then they would get back pay. They would get, insurance, anything they're putting in their thrifts, things of that nature. Um, Unfortunately, though, it's a slow process, and NTU is pursuing these avenues to try and get the probationary employees that we represent in all our different agencies um, back to work at their agency if they so choose.
Duncan, one thing that gets me is that a lot of people that work for IRS and other agencies, to be quite frank about it, could make a lot more money working in the private sector. They have chosen government service for a lot of reasons. They want to serve their country. They want to be part of something bigger than themselves. And, like in the accounting, the accountants that become revenue agents, for example. This is tax filing season. They're working 80-hour weeks in some of these accounting firms.
Mm-hmm.
If it's at IRS, I mean, you work hard, don't get me wrong, but you're not working ridiculous hours certain times of the year. It does at least even out your workload throughout a year. And so that's worth something to many people, even if they're going to make less money. So now what's happening is that these people who have taken government jobs, and it could be in a number of agencies, not just IRS, are now being let go. They've got other options, Duncan. They may not come back, and that is a very sad part of this whole fiasco.
Well, they may not also come back because, one of the bedrocks of the government, jobs have been if you do a good job, if you're steady, if you're doing the work assigned to you and doing it well and, doing just fine, then you're going to have a career here. You're going to be able to stay. You're going to be able to build on that, move your way up if that's what you desire. But that is basically gone right now. You're not seeing that at all. We have no idea how this is going to be rolling out over the coming weeks and months. And so, some people have trepidation, especially if they've gotten another job since they've been let go, to do that. But we want to make sure that everyone that wants to has that opportunity to come back. And that's why NTU is fighting tooth and nail to make that happen for all the agencies that they represent, including IRS.
The odd part about this, Duncan, I'm not going to do this again, but I went into some detail, just even an overview seemed detailed on how a reduction in force is done. I went over that last podcast, so if you want to get more, you can listen or watch that. But the funny thing is, if you go through a reduction in force, the first people who will be let go are the probationary employees. And they weren't doing a RIF. And to do a RIF, you have to go through a whole different set of procedures. If a RIF ever happens, those probationary employees will be the first to be let go. And they wouldn't have to make the argument that they were performing. Now, here's the other part. Reduction in force is meaning you're reducing the workforce in a given agency, competitive area or competitive level. But what we need to keep in mind here is that rumors abound about what a reduction in force may mean. I believe it was the Associated Press and some other news agencies that came out with a news story just a few days ago saying that there are plans in place to RIF half or roughly half of the IRS workforce. Now, that came from an anonymous source, or they got a hold of a piece of paper somebody shared with them that's internal. Sometimes these things are done as trial balloons just to see what the reaction will be. So we don't know whether this will really happen or not, but it certainly is on the table as a possibility. We can't ignore that. So the RIF rumors are out there, but Duncan, we have no official RIF at this point, and there have to be notifications of a RIF if there is one to NTU and a lot of other parties. A lot has to be done, but none of that has been done yet.
Yes, those notices have to be done if they're being done legally. And that again is where the catch-all comes in because a lot of this stuff is against federal statute that we're running into. Case in point, the return to office is against contractual law. We've got a contract. So yeah, RIF has not just things in our contract that have to be done. Those are refinements. The refinements are on statutory law. This is certain ways you have to do this, certain notices you have to give. And again, like you said, if probationary employees come back, they would be the first ones if there is indeed a RIF. I've heard a lot of rumors about this. I don't know how big the RIFs will be. I do know that there is planning at the highest levels of the IRS. I can tell you that for this. How many people are going to be let go? Will there be another round of Vera? Will VISIP, which is the incentive payment based on your position, number of years, things of that nature, to go. We don't know any of that yet. Um, but we want to make sure that everything, again, is done correctly. And the fact is, who's going to be the loser here? Two losers. The employees who are coming here who are going to lose, if there is a RIF, lose their jobs for no good reason because every employee right now is needed, especially here at the IRS. Second one's going to be the American taxpayers. If you have RIFs at these different agencies, you're not going to be able to get an answer at the IRS about your question. We're not going to be able to audit people that should be audited. Get an answer from Social Security, veterans getting help from the VA, going to a park because there's not enough park rangers. I mean, it's just a snowball effect. And right now, people say, well, there's so many federal employees. Yeah, there are a lot of federal employees, but we're about the same level we were numbers in 1950 per capita. The federal workforce has not really grown that much, but the population of the United States has, and so we're a much smaller percentage than we used to be way back when. So when I hear the federal government's got to be smaller, it's like it already is uh, compared to the services that we used to give.
Duncan, this takes us right to another issue that has blown up in recent days. The General Services Administration, which has gotten, as you mentioned before, its own staffing cuts, sent out a listing of buildings for sale. Now, just to give you an idea, some of the buildings for sale listed on that list were FBI headquarters in Washington, the Justice Department headquarters on Constitution Avenue in Washington, several other large headquarters for agencies in Washington. Closer to home, we have a building that used to be part of the old Fort Harrison. When they closed the fort, the building, it's the second largest federal government building next to the Pentagon. And it's in the Indianapolis suburb of Lawrence. It's still there. Several thousand people still work there. The Defense Department's there, but it was a defense building for years. Now it's a GSA building, and other federal government agencies are in there, although defense is by far the largest. That was on the list as well. The Minton Capehart building, where Duncan sits at this moment, was on the list. So all these government buildings that were owned by are owned by the government were on this list. The list was put out. Then all of a sudden the list was pared down. Then all of a sudden the list was completely withdrawn. And now I think on the website they say, well, we're looking at it again. It's like, ready, fire, aim. This is where we're at the moment. So you have actually been quoted with local media here in Indianapolis about this Capehart situation. Tell us what we know.
Yeah, this has been one of those things where, we're trying to get the word out to alert folks. We're trying to get the widest word out about, the reductions, possible reductions in force, the probationary employees being let go, the needless return to office things and that. But the thing that's apparently sparked it is when you see these buildings potentially go up for sale. And at one point, there were 440 federal buildings across the United States that went up for sale. This has spiked, as you said, the interest of the press. I've done a couple of interviews now about this in my position as chapter president, and the thing that people need to realize is, because I've heard people go, "Well, we're coming back to work. Are we going to have a space to work in?" Okay, putting a building up for sale. First thing is that doesn't mean it's going to be sold. In Indianapolis, our city county building, they were looking at selling that. And everybody said, well, basically, it can't be used for anything else but offices because of the way it's wired, the way it's built, things of that nature. So it's sitting there and it's still being used as a government office. The Bean building out at Fort Bend, just because of, like you said, because of its size and the number of people there, basically, if you wanted to do something, the only thing I could think of aside from its current task would be to raise it, remediate everything, and put in something like housing. And with the economy right now and the interest rates, I can't see doing that. The Minton Capehart Federal Building is a historic building. It's on the historic preservation site. So you can't knock this thing down as much as you want to. You can't knock it down. So and I can tell you, they couldn't make apartments out of this. They couldn't make condos out of this. Basically, the only thing that this is fit for is federal government offices, because there's an awful lot of other office space out there that would be judged better than this if somebody wanted to come in, and it would be cost prohibitive. What most likely would be happening in the vast majority of these, if they do ever sell, would be that somebody else aside from GSA would be an agency's landlord. That would be the difference.
Well, yeah, the thing about the Bean building, that building that's the second largest government building out in Lawrence, suburb of Indianapolis, that was a Defense Department building. It was on the list to be closed by the closing. They had these base closing commissions. Then they found out because that building was built in the late 40s, early 50s. Guess what's all throughout that building? Asbestos. So they couldn't knock it down without dealing with the asbestos, which in itself is a prohibitively expensive thing, which is why they kept the building open. It was cheaper to remodel it than it was to tear it down. So there are all kinds of complexities that come up in these situations. And by the way, Duncan, just so people know, this also kind of gets into lease space in some of the smaller offices, because that's also being looked at, and we don't really know. I don't think there's any list of that, but obviously that they're under the gun as well.
There have been lists that are out there. It's funny because I've seen some lists that our folks in criminal investigation CI have had that talk about, okay, well, here's a list of what's going to be happening across the country. And I've seen two or three different variations of that list. And then the next thing I hear is from GSA saying there's nothing impacted in our state of Indiana. So there's a lot of conflicting information out there. Yes, they are looking at reducing space, but employees are going to have space to work. So if they eliminate that, they're going to have to find someplace else. And if there's not enough space in the posted duty, like there are in a couple of our posted duty here in Indiana and on countless others across the country, then they're going to have to find more space for that. So it's, go out, do the bidding, make an award, things of that nature. So it's not an easy process to do anything with federal buildings or even lease buildings.
Okay, Duncan, on that note, give us your final comment for this podcast.
Yeah, I've got a couple of tiered comments here. First is, if you're watching this, you work for the service and you're not an NTU member, if you don't realize who's fighting for you, I don't know what else we can do to show you that. So I would advise you being a member. Secondly, it's really tough to tell folks who are outside the government that don't understand all the turmoil that's going on. You have good people that, I've seen post on our Facebook that, well, what's the big deal? What's the big deal about 5 bullets? It's not a big deal. If my boss wants to know something, then, I'd send him. Well, it's more complicated, that way more complicated. Well, if the business isn't working, then you do need to cut people. We're providing services. We're not, the federal government, any government is not set up to be a business. Should we be good stewards of the taxpayer dollars? You bet you. But that doesn't mean that we're supposed to turn a profit. We're supposed to provide the services and be here for the things that the American taxpayers and the American public want and need. And therefore, we need to continue to do those things and not look at it as a profit center. And I would urge everyone to, if they have relatives or friends or things of that nature that don't understand that, take the time to explain it to them. Lastly, I want to make sure that everybody understands that we would do this podcast as much as we can every week. I would strongly urge folks to either subscribe, if you like the video, subscribe to it on YouTube, or to subscribe to our webpage, or not our webpage, but our site on Facebook, as you said, NTU 49 Indiana, because we don't know how much longer I'll be able to send this out to employees on the IRS email. So we want to make sure that you still have that access. So make sure that you subscribe for other means in case this is cut off.
Very good, all very good points. Thank you, Duncan. What I did is I searched the news to see what news organizations are saying about some of what's going on. I noticed something on CNBC, which is the business channel on cable TV, and they talk about the DOGE, the so-called Department of Government Efficiency, uh, and they talk about the scale of the cuts. And if we, as federal employees, do lose our jobs, we are allowed to take unemployment compensation. If we're RIF'd, it's not because of any performance. You're just being RIF'd because they're downsizing or whatever. There is an organization, the Unemployment Compensation Fund for federal employees. CNBC makes the point that if this agency is overwhelmed with claims, it never had anything like this happen in the past. You may have trouble getting your timely payments because they just can't handle the flood of work. So just sort of be aware of that. That's a little part of this that I hadn't even thought about. Also, what's this doing to the economy in general? I looked at the Reuters news service and they quoted a global outplacement firm. They're well known. It's called Challenger Grand Christmas. They issued a statement Thursday. Planned job cuts in the federal government. Just let's just put it this way. Planned job cuts generally in the economy in the month of February 2025 vaulted this much, 245%. Think about that number. 245% to over 172,000 in February of this year. To give you some context on that, that is the highest level we've seen in any month since July of 2020. Now, gee, what was going on in July of 2020? Something, oh no, the pandemic was really hitting its peak at that time, I believe. Then, if you want to go back to a February that's this bad, you have to go all the way back to the Great Recession of 16 years ago. If you're looking at any month, so we have got an unemployment issue all of a sudden in this country. It was sort of moving that direction anyway. And now with all these federal job cuts, that's just making a bad situation much worse. The last thing I will do is Accounting Today, which is a website for news of people in the accounting business, quoted somebody that you've dealt with in the past, for a former commissioner of the IRS, John Koskinen, known for a lot of things. He helped the year 2000 issue for the federal government, kept that from being a real serious issue, which it could have been. Then served his time, and I think he was a good one. Some people may not agree. I think he was a very good IRS commissioner. But John Koskinen was asked about these probationary employees being let go, and he said the following. A lot of these people have been there a year or 2 years and are revenue agents and revenue officers, but also customer service. They can do more standard work. So the more senior people can handle a more complicated issue. So when you wipe out these people doing the standard work, the more senior people there have to fill the gaps to the extent that they can, meaning, guess what? We're not nearly as efficient. So there we go with the efficiency argument. So, Duncan, thank you very much. We do plan to be back next week. We hope we'll be back before any possible government shutdown or have some news about that. We do appreciate the fact that you watch and listen. You can, again, we put a link on our Facebook page every time we do have a new podcast, both video and audio links. You can subscribe to this on YouTube if you wish. You can also subscribe to the audio version. I'm on several different platforms. It's called Podcast by Larry Lannan, Lannan. I'd put a lot of other podcasts on there too, but the Chapter 49 podcasts are on there as well. So once again, thank you so much for watching and listening. Please be safe and be kind.